Welcome back to another awesome episode of Traveling Through the 80s with the 80s Kids. I'm your host, Rich Oliver, and always with me is my co-host, Kyle Lentz.
Hello, hello.
And always dashingly debonair, Don Brown.
I mean, I'm not always with you, Rich. We do live in separate houses, but definitely here in spirit too sometimes.
All right, well, you just ruined the fantasy. See,
Sorry.
That's how you...
All right.
And Kyle, what is
Yes.
going on this week? What do we have?
Oh, we got some excitement this week. We have a very, very special guest. So we are very excited to be talking to an 80s icon as well as a current icon. He's definitely been from the 70s to now, still working.
Icon pushing into his 80s.
So we're going to talk to Bruce Vilanch, the great comedy writer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
How could I resist? You know, how often do I get to Utica?
Yeah. Whichever. We'll take it.
All right.
Well, thanks so much for being here. We're very excited to have you on because we know we've got so much we want to talk to you about because you've been writing so many amazing things for so many different things, the Oscars, you've written movies, TV specials, everything under the sun. So we're definitely grateful to have you here on the show with us today. So let's go to your. Oh, thank you. Let's kind of go back to your origins.
I'm actually writing a book now about all the things that people ask me about on podcasts, which is about all the pieces of shit that I wrote. I mean, if we're allowed to say that on this podcast, I'm not sure.
Go for it.
They're just the Star Wars holiday special, the Paul Lynde Halloween special, the Brady Bunch Variety Hour, Wayne Newton SeaWorld, the Ice Pirates. I mean, all of these things that have become iconic over the years because of the internet, and a whole generation of people who were not alive when I committed these felonies are now interested in them. So I'm writing a book. It's called "It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time."
Oh, absolutely.
And it's about how all of these things happen because people, the first question they say is, "How did that happen?"
Which is true. It is. It's a good question. How?
Well, yeah, because when you're not in the business, once you're in the business, you realize that shit happens. I mean, things the least. But what you also learn is that sometimes they happen overnight, and sometimes they take years to gestate. And you're never sure which one it's going to be. And it can go either way.
Right, yeah.
Somebody said, let's do that. And tomorrow they're calling me with a deal memo. Wow. It'll just be forever, The rights will expire, people will die. You're dealing with some cousin who had no idea that this was worth any money. So it's an addict.
So when did you get started?
But you ask a question because I'll prattle on,
What got you started in comedy writing? What brought you into that?
Oh, I looked in the mirror and said, funny. I was a child actor. I was never a child star, or we'd be having this conversation in rehab. They don't do well. But I was a child actor. My parents recognized I was happy when I was dancing around, making faces and cracking jokes. And my mother had great timing, and she came from a whole family of characters, one of whom, Uncle Mickey, was a Catskills comic. He was not a successful Catskills comic, but he was of the breed. And so I kind of grew up surrounded by all that, and they loved the theater. We grew up in Jersey. We went to New York all the time. So I was always interested in it. And my parents said, well, I taught myself to read looking at the ads for movies in newspapers. Back when they had ads for movies.
Yes.
Back when they had newspapers.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah, so I was it was always kind of a part of it. And as I got older, I was no longer a child actor, and I had a deep voice, and I was heavy, and I looked 40. I always looked old. I was a 40-year-old child. I looked very old. And I was auditioning against real actors who, were really all those things. And so I wasn't getting cast, and I began writing about that. And they said, well, you seem to have a talent for writing. Maybe you could go into journalism. Newspapers will never die. Go, no. And they were afraid I would never make a living as an actor. So so I went to Ohio State and had a journalism and theater degree. And when I got out of college, I went to work for the Chicago Tribune, being a feature writer and writing a lot about show business and meeting a lot of people who came through town who were, Hollywood types. And one of them was Bette Midler, who was just starting out. She was on Broadway in Fiddler on the Roof, playing one of the daughters. And she had this act that she was working on. And I reviewed her. A friend of mine knew her. And she liked what I wrote. And she said, "You're very funny." I said, "You're funny. You should talk more." And she said, "You got any lines?" And that was the beginning of a relationship which has lasted to this day. Which, I mean, it just doesn't it's 50 years. I mean, again, clutching the heart. Where's my digitalis? And but she won't quit. She says, "I'm not retiring. You can't make me." That's her mantra.
Yeah,
That's incredible. I love it.
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
And then, as a result of her, a lot of other people came to me and asked me. And so, after 5 years, I moved out to Hollywood and started doing variety television. And cable kind of killed that, but I branched out.
Sure.
And I still act. So, and now I get cast, but it's hard because I'm a type.
So now, you like you mentioned some of the specials you wrote, like the Paul Lynde Halloween special, which is it's so memorable. If you get the chance to watch
every year, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like there are so few things at Halloween that you can share with your family or with your extended lunatic friends. I mean, that's why Hocus Pocus lives. I mean, we finally did Hocus Pocus 2 after 30 years, and it was a gigantic hit for Disney Plus.
Oh, it was actually really good. I enjoyed it very much.
I last year did the Paul Lynde Christmas special for RuPaul's channel, which is where we recreated what would have been Paul's Christmas special. And we had a whole lot of people playing a whole lot of dead people. We had Liberace, Sal Mineo, Tab Hunter, a lot of guys who were in the closet. And some fabulous drag queens, Jackie Beat, Lady Bunny, and a guy who does Paul Lynde in Vegas, who's hilarious, Michael Arrington. And it's a very funny show, but it is like, 40 years after the Paul Lynde Halloween special.
Wow.
Here he comes again.
There's kind of like a nostalgic feeling for those things, because the variety show was so big back in the 70s. And it's kind of come back again to a degree. Like reality shows might be a little bit darker side of the reality of that variety show, but it has sort of.
See people looking at An American Family. They don't really watch that. They've made movies about An American Family, but they don't actually watch the original. Also, life is different now. I mean, ask any screenwriter, and it's one of the reasons why there's so much interest in period and fantasy is because you don't have to play by the rules of contemporary life, where everybody knows everything, and there are no more bar fights because rather than fight, you Google, and you get the real answers, so you don't have to slug it out. And that all plot developments, are on people staring at a screen because they're finding information. So you go back to where there weren't those phones. I mean, and you look at a thing like Game of Thrones, where they had to send a raven from one kingdom to another to get a message. Right. But there are dragons.
There you go.
Right.
Exactly. So, and I mean, but I understand the appeal of that because contemporary music is so cut and dry because everybody is texting we're on a 24-hour news cycle and everybody knows everything every minute. Mm-hmm. And that's difficult to write to. That's difficult to write. It's hard to have mistaken identity. It's hard to have coincidence because everybody knows where everybody is.
Right. That is true.
You can't say the call's coming from inside the house anymore.
Right.
That's true. It's like you watch Home Alone now and you're like, he could just get his cell phone or whatever.
Exactly.
Right. Everything's fine.
It's impossible to be home alone.
Right.
You have to be the Unabomber to be home alone.
Yeah.
So leading up to the Star Wars holiday special, the infamous Star Wars holiday special, which I've watched several times over the years, and it's still so charming in its own right.
It is. It's sort of ridiculous. I mean, of course, it also is from a more naive time, and also Well, several things about it. First of all, if we knew that 40 odd years later we'd still be talking about it, we might have paid closer attention. It was one crazy idea, one crazy special after another. So it didn't seem so unusual. And essentially, it was George Lucas trying to keep the Star Wars franchise on a low boil while he was making The Empire Strikes Back. He only had the movie. And of course, you also have to remember, and this upsets Star Wars people terribly, that a lot of people didn't think that much of Star Wars. It was one movie. It was a summer blockbuster, but it was like a parody of Old Republic studio serials.
Right.
That an older generation went to see in the movies on Saturday morning, where there would be cliffhangers and you'd wipe from one scene to another, and all those devices that George took from his childhood. So there wasn't this reverence for the canon. It hadn't become the Scientology of the nerds. Because but what happened was, after the three movies, he took a break, and then three movies showed up on this new thing called VHS, and then on an even newer thing called the internet. And so the interest brewed, and people found the holiday special and felt betrayed, saying, "George, how could you lend yourself to this?" And so he was trying to buy up all the copies, which is hilarious. But every time he does another Star Wars project, it comes back. And in fact, he finally owned it. He sold the rights to Lego, and they did, as part of his Disney deal. Nice. And they did a Disney Plus special a couple of years ago, Star Wars Legos, with a Lego Daisy Ridley, who looked distressingly like Rosie O'Donnell. I don't know. I mean, for all of us, it's a cautionary tale. When they make your Lego, you don't know who you're going to turn out looking like.
Yeah.
It was weird.
They all have the same body type.
But at the time, it was just one insane thing after. And of course, the other thing is that, if, as I've said many times, if you remember the 70s, you weren't there. It was a blend. It was the holdover drugs from the 60s and the new stuff coming in, and just the whole idea of, if you remember it. We were fairly baked a lot of the time. Now, I say this on podcasts, and then I see, somebody sent me a blog saying, Vilanch, who admits to copious drug abuse. Well, I mean, I embroider, I was working, I was writing, so no, I wasn't. I mean, I joked that Carrie Fisher and I would snort the sweet and low.
Wow. Because
it was there, and if you spilled it, putting it in your coffee, we'd go down with a straw. But I mean, I'm kidding. That's
right. Of course.
Well, I think we're in a unique.
Well, I see a shaggy dog, I get excited.
Yeah, I think we're in a unique, era, because we grew up as kids watching it. So anyone that might have been an adult or a teenager would look at that when it came out as, oh, that's campy. But we were watching Carol Burnett, so we knew who Harvey, was. We knew all the people that were in it, and we were excited because now we're seeing Star Wars on TV. We don't have to go to the theater. We're seeing our favorite characters.
Yes.
And so
100%.
I think so. When we look at it, we don't look at it as the train wreck that everyone else calls it. It's a piece of our nostalgia that we embrace it, and we got to. I mean, we were watching Mark Hamill and R2D2 and C3PO and the Muppets. It's like we're like, give us more, because you couldn't get to the movie as a young kid. Right. So I think we have a unique perspective on that holiday special, that we truly love it and embrace it for what it was and for the time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%. Because I do remember that night it aired. I remember being glued to that TV right at that time when it started, and watching it, just absolutely just mesmerized by it, because it was more Star Wars. That's what I wanted, and it was right there.
Friday before Thanksgiving week. It was that was.
It was great.
I was hoping Life Day would happen around then.
He wanted to create.
Now he's got an unofficial.
Did he work with you regularly? Did you sit with him?
He came down from Marin, and we had a couple of meetings, a couple of days of meetings, at which he explained what the show was and why it was what it was. He said he had 10 Star Wars stories written, and that he was going to make 3 movies, and he was going to did he say 3 or did he say 6? He was going to make 6 movies, which finally he did. And then and he had 4 other stories that he was selling off. One became a graphic novel, I think, called the Eye of the Eye of the Moat in the Eye, something like that.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye, I believe is.
Oh, that's Splinter of the Mind. There you go. Yep. I forget. One of them was supposed to be Boba Fett, and he couldn't get an animated feature out of Boba Fett, so we wound up putting a short Boba Fett spot in the show, which is the only thing that really remains that people actually universally like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, say, "Oh my God!"
Disney
Boba,
Plus.
and it's because it's a Trivial Pursuit question: where did Boba Fett start? So, and then he had this one story left, and he sold it to CBS, and I think he expected it was going to be an original musical, because he thought that's what I think he thought variety specials were, and of course, A, that's not what they are, and B, if he was going to create an original musical, he probably would not have created one where the lead characters were Wookiees who cannot sing, dance, or speak any known language.
Right.
And who, in fact, sound like fat people having orgasms. When trust me, I know. So,
funny you say that, because we did talk about this recently, where we were saying that's the one thing about the special that's really hard to get through, is because you don't know what they're saying. You know, you just kind of have to figure out what they're saying.
Well, that's what you actually, and and also they don't move well. You know, I mean, the little one, Itchy, with the most mobile of them, but the others were like, it was production to get them from point A to point B. You never see, there's no scenes in Star Wars where anybody's chasing Chewbacca and he's outrunning them.
Right, that's true.
Will not happen. He could climb a tree probably, but they're, not outrun them. But so we had, in addition that they couldn't speak, we couldn't use subtitles because it was 1978, and the network said nobody will read subtitles, which I think is ironic. I mean, when I met Lupita Nyong'o, I said, I told her this story. I said, couldn't use subtitles. She doesn't speak a word of English in any of the Star Wars movies. Everything she says is in some made-up language. I say it's a bastardized Klingon. Lots of K's and vowels, and everything is subtitles. But of course now, even with the advent of streaming and Netflix, I put subtitles on everything. If I watch some show that's set in Yorkshire, I don't know what the hell they're saying.
Right.
They're speaking English, but I don't know what they're saying. So I have subtitles. I mean, you can go to New Zealand and spend your entire time in New Zealand miming what you need, because a Kiwi accent is so heavy sometimes you truly can't discern what's being said. Anyway, so that was what we had to deal with. We had to deal with the fact that we had actors who couldn't speak, and we had things that had to be explained, and that was why we had a character like Art Carney, who was the intergalactic Tupperware salesman, who was coming to give Frau Chewbacca to try, allegedly to sell her some goods, but in reality, he was part of the resistance. Right. And that was how the plot could move along. We had to have people who could say things and interpret what the Wookiees were trying to tell us.
Right.
That was not easy.
I can imagine, yeah.
And as I say, and they also don't burst into song, which seems to me, if you're going to do a musical, is a minimal requirement of the lead character. It should be
to be able to sing, right? Yeah. Well, at least in the end, I mean, there's got to be some sort of vindication for yourself, knowing that people have, to a degree, embraced it more than they did maybe back then.
Well, truthfully, what you said, I haven't heard that perspective from people. I mean, maybe it's because they have a deep need to be hip, and the hip thing is to say, "Oh my God, this was so awful and ridiculous."
Oh, right.
They don't own the fact that they saw them when they were children, and they really. Right. I mean, I saw a lot of crap when I was a kid that I loved, and when I show it to people now, they kind of go,
"Right."
Well,
what were you on when you were a child? Were you like a Ritalin baby? What? Sort of like a Sonja Henie movie. Sonja Henie was an Olympic ice skater who could not act at all, but she was a big movie star because nobody had ever seen ice skating. You know, in the 40s, there was no television, and they went to the movies and they saw things that they had not experienced in Iowa. You know, Carmen Miranda,
Right.
Esther Williams, a swimmer. I mean, it was an excuse for big production numbers. So, and I embraced all that stuff. And you look at it now, and I mean, not those pictures, but Sonja Henie movies are a riot because they're all about getting her on the ice.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a, you know, you look at it now, even just I think just that nostalgia is just really what helps you to really enjoy it more. And I showed it to my older children, and they watch it and they're looking at me like, "What? You watch this?" I'm like, "Well, yeah."
I think there's a certain, well, because they're used to CGI and
I mean, you even talk videos that are very quick and
I mean, I was in the background that HBO was on, and they were showing Armageddon, and the CGI has exploded exponentially since they made Armageddon. And you see why they remake Godzilla and King Kong, because they have new things they can have them do with CGI that they couldn't have them do the last time. And so I was looking at Armageddon saying, this looks really cheap. And you know, it wasn't cheap. It cost a fucking but it was but compared to what can be done now, and I think somebody who grew up watching the current crop of stuff looks at something even as recent as 20, 25 years ago and goes, what the fuck?
Right, exactly. So now moving ahead a little bit, I definitely want to talk about Ice Pirates. Because that's one that I have such a warm place in my heart for. I grew up watching that because the first time I got to see it, I didn't get to see it in theaters, but I remember being in the video store, and that artwork on the cover, was it Richard Amsel? Is that who did the
Richard
poster with the the adventure lettering? And I'm like,
I'm on it. I'm on my throne.
Yes. The Emperor and his bird.
With my bird. That throne was the lobby of the Los Angeles Theater.
Oh, really?
Great big movie palace, which at the time was showing Mexican porn. And it's all, I mean, there's a whole bunch of scenes shot in there. The throne, there was the grand staircase that goes up to the mezzanine, and the throne was at the top of the staircase. And we had the Amazons were on the stair. We did a lot of things. When they take my head and I'm a prisoner, my head is a prisoner. That is the ladies' room of the Los Angeles Theater.
Oh, no kidding.
It was. Those theaters were built like 3,000 people, and the ladies' room was where women could go and they had fainting couches.
Oh,
because it was all because there were so many women using them. They had big vanity tables because they would do their makeup and stuff, and so it's gigantic, and it's all obviously empty of anything, but it's and many movies have been shot there. A lot of stuff has been shot there. When we did Gypsy with Bette, we shot at the Los Angeles Theater.
Okay, that's cool.
It's not. Occasionally, somebody will use it as a theater, but not too much. But it was already, we had to fluff it up for the Ice Pirates.
Of course,
because it really was so. I mean, you can imagine it was just like a porn house. So there were, God knows,
right,
Coney Island white over the place.
I would explain the fainting couches maybe then.
Yes.
So what brought you to, like, what was the inspiration for Ice Pirates? What got you to?
Well, it started out as an adventure, as a straight off action movie, and it was developed by a guy named John Foreman, who was an agent who became a producer. He was Paul Newman's agent, and they formed a company called Newman Foreman, and they produced Paul's movies. And so he was a producer, and he had a deal at MGM, and he had an office on the lot. And he developed Ice Pirates, and it was poking along, and MGM had the television division of MGM had a show on the air called Vegas with Robert Urich. And he was a big TV star, and as part of his re-upping, they had guaranteed him a certain number of features so he could become a movie star. And the first one had not done terribly well. It was about I can't think of the name of it, but it was about some sort of strange mad cow disease. He was the sheriff in Montana, and somebody was killing cows, and helicopters were dropping dead cows in fields, and I forget it. It's certainly worth seeing.
Oh, absolutely.
It was not a success. And John pitched him Ice Pirates, where he could be Harrison Ford, and so that appealed to him. But then he said. He went to the head of the studio and Frankie Blondes and said, "Well, I think this." And Yablon said, "No, they got to do something different with it. We can't just do an imitation." So John thought, "Let's make it more of a comedy spoof of a kind of Star Wars thing." And he brought in Stuart Raffle, who was a director who'd done action and comedy. And Stuart had an idea, and he went and wrote it as a comedy. And while this was all happening, the head of the studio was fired. And John became the head of the studio. So he immediately greenlit the Ice Pirates.
Awesome.
And we rushed into production. And they said, but it needs some more funny stuff in it. So they brought me in to do a rewrite or to insert funny stuff into it. Space herpes and things like that. So now, Weird Wendon was Stuart's idea. The evil emperor whose body had been gambled away in various poker games and was just a head that they kept on putting on bodies. And Paul Williams was going to play the part. And about 2 weeks before the start date, Paul quit. He said, he was having a lot of problems. He said, "I can't do it." And so Stuart said, "You be Weird Wendon." And so, well, famous for my head already, so why not do that? So I became Weird Wendon, and I rewrote, and they said, "No, we don't see him entering on page 3. He comes in later in the story. He is not the lead." So we started shooting the thing, and we were shooting it, and it was like a 3-month schedule. About 2 months in, they fired John Foreman as head of the studio. And so he went from the Irving Thalberg suite back down to his bungalow office. And the new guy who came in said, "Oh, no, we got to wrap this picture up right away." And he kept slashing the whole production schedule. And that is why then we came up with the time warp device. Because we had all of this plot to cover that we couldn't shoot. So we had everything happen in stop time, in fast motion, time warp kind of thing. So we wrapped the thing. The night we had one scene left that was crucial, and we were shooting it. And Culver City had a power failure. The whole city went out, and so we had to call the guy and say, "We need one more day to finish this thing." And he said, "Okay, but 8 hours." But the next day, the power came on. We shot the thing, and it had to wrap. While this was going on the last day, Mel Brooks walked in, who I knew, and he said, "I'm doing a Star Wars spoof, and I want to look at your sets. I think maybe I can use your sets and save some money." So we actually, they moved our set budget to his budget because he had a much bigger budget for Spaceballs. And he had a whole special effects thing going on. We didn't have any of that. So some of the sets can be seen in Spaceballs as well.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize that. That's
changing thing. And then our picture was kind of like in limbo. And it got marketed and it got released while this new guy was not paying much attention until the weekend it opened, and it was actually a half-assed hit. I mean, Monday morning they were all calling and saying, "Look at the numbers on the Ice Pirates. Look, people showed." I mean, I can't even quote the figures now because it means nothing because everything it's 40 years ago. So you have to add zeros to everything. But it was actually, and the marketing, the exit polls were good. People liked it. They enjoyed it. They thought it was funny and silly. And I'm sure Mel wasn't thrilled because he had a big space movie coming in. But it just kept going. And then what happened to it was Ted Turner bought the studio, and he got the entire library, and he loved this movie. He at the time he had, I think, 3 or 4 cable channels, and he showed it on all the cable channels he could show on. over and over again. It got this TV audience that was amazing. Now, Angelica Houston, this was her second picture. She was John Huston's daughter, and her first picture she'd made in Europe with Moshe Dayan's son, Asaf Dayan. Nobody saw that. This was her second movie, and off of it, she got Prizzi's Honor, which John Ford produced in John Huston, and she won the Oscar. So they all wanted to show Angelica Houston movies. Well, there were 2 other Angelica Houston pictures. So back it came. It was on CBS. It was on TNT. It was on everything all over. Yeah. To the point where, to this day, 40 years later, whenever I see Angelica, I say, how's it going? She says, I can't get rid of that fucking picture. No matter what I do. The first thing they ask me is, what was Ice Pirates like? She said, what is wrong with my life? A steamed actress now, but I'm about it because it's one of those things. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the video, home video, and the exposure on television. And it's that kind of a movie where people watch it together and they can play drinking games and
it's a fun movie.
It's fun. It's just ridiculous. And there's so many bizarre. I mean, John Matuzak, the football player, and oh my God, he was so coked up most of the time. In fact, one day he drove off the lot and smashed his car into the gates of MGM.
Oh my God!
And we all came running out in costume. It was like a scene from a Martian invasion picture. We're all running out in our costumes to see if he's okay. He was okay, but I mean, he was great fun. I would like to say that. I mean, he wasn't coked up all the time, but he did have a predilection. But he was, and it was the 80s. He was a lot of fun. He was a great deal of fun. And
he went on to play Sloth in the Goonies, which was
he was in it, and John Carradine. Father of the Carradine dynasty. Towards the end, he was in it. It was Mary Crosby, who was Bing Crosby's daughter. All these people came to visit. Angelica was living with Jack Nicholson. He came down to hang out because he couldn't believe all the creatures wandering around. Ron Perlman, who became the Beast, and later on Sons of Anarchy.
Sons of Hellboy, Sons of
Anarchy. I mean, we were just all saying, what are we doing? But we were having a lot of fun.
Oh, so cool. It definitely shows in the movie. That's why I like watching it. It just seems like it's fun. I enjoy watching it for just the fun of it. So we've talked to other people about the same type of thing where it takes like some time for really to build such an audience, and the fact that, like you say, it was able to get that Turner play and then the Angelica Houston bump that really solidified it.
It's always been one of those those subcutaneous cultural things. I mean, there are people who know, there are people who kind of go, what? And there are people who worship it, and but it just has that thing going. A lot of times, I'll meet people will come over and they know me from Hollywood Squares usually, but every now and again somebody will come over and say, Wyndham, Ice Pirate. And I know they're deep.
Do they ever have any like special screenings or anything? Have you ever attended those?
Yeah, they probably do, and I'd be surprised because of all of them, I'm the most accessible. So I'm surprised, but so I haven't heard anything about that. So if it's happening, they've managed to ignore me. But
it should happen if it hasn't.
Sure. But maybe they chase after Angelica. I don't know.
There you go. So now
last thing she wants to do.
Right. Yeah. She's like, I'll conveniently be busy that weekend. So now, I mean, you got into writing for the Oscars for a long time too. Yeah. You wrote the jokes, and
I did 25 years officially, and I get called in. I get called in all the time by people who say, help me.
So you still will sort of lend a hand?
So I'm not officially involved with anything, but they know that I know the show. A lot of times the show is written by the staff. The host has a talk show and he brings his staff of 12 people over, and they're all writing for him, but they wind up having to write for other people, and they don't know quite what to do about that. Mm-hmm. So that's where I come in.
That's interesting because you don't think about that. There's so many different hosts that have to come out and
Yeah.
do their charming bit.
The presenters, and yeah, exactly. And if you're lucky, you find people who are funny, who want to do some kind of a little bit, because you have to be sort of respectful. I mean, it's the Oscars, I mean, no matter how hard they try to debase it, it still is a big deal. And you're talking about things, even though you may not be talking about things for long. I mean,
Right.
a year from now, people may say, "Who won last year?" "Oh, yeah, the fat guy." I mean, because they ask anybody who won the year, ask them this year who won last year, and they don't remember.
They're like, oh,
But, yeah, exactly.
it's
So
true.
yeah.
So now, do you usually write for Bette Midler's movies, or at least like?
Well, I have Midlerized a few of them. Yes. I
Mhm.
mean, I look at them all, and I have actually Midlerized. I mean, Hocus Pocus, yes, because that was such a very special character, Winnie. I mean, she has her own way of speaking, her own sort of patois, and the guys who wrote it originally wrote that, but we embellished it. And this Hocus Pocus 2, a wonderful writer named Jen D'Angelo, who wrote Modern Family for years, wrote it. And she was concentrating a lot on the next generation of witches who are, young and who speak in emojis and LOLs and OMGs. But Winifred has no idea what any of that is. She's coming in with high old English, OLDE English. So I came in on that. Yeah.
And it was the second film was as good as the first, I felt. I thought they actually did a really good job.
Fun. I thought that was terrific. She had a lot to do. I mean, her character was really rich, and I mean, the level of success that it's had. I mean, they're actually talking about another one.
Really?
I think, well, I mean, what can they? The second time they've killed off these witches,
Right?
I mean, the first time they were dead 400 years when they came back, and now the second time they'd only been dead 30. So
I guess they got to trim it down to only like maybe 10.
I don't know. This last one, our major concern was that it's no secret that all three of them had work, and they were not going to look the same as they looked 30 years ago. And they sure as hell were not going to look worse than they looked 30 years ago.
Right.
So now what?
Yeah, oh, for sure. But yeah,
Wake up.
Now is there
Really?
Now are there other of her movies that you got to doctor up and?
Oh yeah, I can never talk about those.
Okay.
The NDAs galore.
Sure.
But I mean, I wrote a lot of other television, and I have a stage musical I've just written during COVID,
cool.
which is about it's a small show about a guy, a 40-year-old gay comic who never happened, who's working at a comedy club as a waiter in New York, and COVID hits, and he has to quarantine in the attic of his parents' home in Longview, Texas, where he has an intimate relationship with his imaginary friend, Dolly Parton. Comes off of a poster, and because she sees he's in trouble, and it's him and Dolly and 5 musicians, and it's called "Here You Come Again." Sounds like a porno, but isn't. Here You Come Again, How Dolly Saved My Life in 12 Easy Songs. And we did it on a grant from a theater in Florida, and we did a Zoom with actors, and they loved it. And I had to go to Dolly and get the music rights, and I thought, well, this is not her brand. She loved it. I'd written for her over the years. She loved it, and she's now my partner. She's now our partner.
Oh, excellent.
And we've done 4 productions of it. We premiered it in Delaware, and then we did Palm Beach and Dallas and Pittsburgh, and now May 17th we open in Nashville.
Oh, cool.
Where I am trying to orchestrate her appearance, because she's very busy between curing leprosy and coming up with a cake mix. a million things that she's doing. She does not stop. And I keep saying, why? Well, Bruce, I have no kids. Where's the money going to go?
Yeah. Oh.
Is there hopes of it making its way to Broadway?
Well, it's small for Broadway. I mean, we aimed it small, and we just want to see what happens. It really works, but it works in small venues, and possibly if it comes to that, she had her eyes on a Broadway show, a biography show that would use all of her songs. But I think that she got burned on 9 to 5 musical on Broadway. It's been a spectacular Broadway, but. So I think that's going to be a Netflix movie.
Oh, nice.
That'd be great.
She saw Beautiful, and she said, well, if Carole King can do it, and the show ends at Tapestry, then I could do it, and it ends at Porter Wagoner. And I said, well, yeah, you could, sure. But meanwhile, there's this, which is totally, other than the fact that it uses a catalog, it's not a show about her. It's not a biography in any respect.
Yeah,
it's a complete fantasy. But we'll see. If maybe one of those small theaters. There are a couple of under 1,000 seat theaters, like the Golden, the Booth. They're small, and maybe it could happen.
Well, hopefully, at least a touring production. You can go around with cities to showcase it. That would be great.
Well, we'll be in Connecticut this summer at the Goodspeed, which is a great incubator which is in East Haddam, which is between New Haven and Hartford. It has a great audience that comes and supports them.
Oh, fantastic!
That's after Nashville.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So how far along are you for the book coming out?
Well, I'm smelling the deadline already, so. I'm getting closer. I'm almost done with the draft of it that I can actually show people and cash a check for.
Excellent.
Oh, nice.
So we'll definitely be looking forward to hopefully by year's end, maybe.
The plan is to have it around Oscar season next year, because there'll be a lot.
Perfect. There you go.
Yeah,
that'd be fun. Yeah,
that'd be perfect. Excellent.
Well, maybe when the book comes out, we'll be able to have you back on then.
Absolutely.
Of course. God willing, why not?
Yes, absolutely.
And don't change that backdrop ever, because I feel right at home. This looked like the Ice Pirate ship. That sad craft.
Yes. Flying. Do you guys have any other questions?
We could talk to you for hours. I mean, you just have touched everything that, as 70s kids, 80s kids, and growing up, from Hollywood Squares and Paul Lynde and Donnie and Marie and Sonny and Cher, all of those incredible things. So, I mean, it just thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Oh, it's fun. I'm delighted.
Fans of the 80s and fans of everything that you have touched in some way or form. So it's an absolute pleasure.
Behave, Dominic.
Including
now we're going into Me Too territory.
Yeah, and I learned about Mexican porn. I didn't know that.
It existed. It's a subset of porn. Now, to be fair, some of it could have been Honduran porn or Guatemalan porn.
Right.
My money is on Mexican porn in 1983 in downtown Los Angeles.
Right. That's a niche. That is definitely a niche.
Before it was DTLA, they call it.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
Sharing
thank you
these
so much
great
for your
stories.
time.
So much fun. We really appreciate it. But and hopefully we'll get to see you again.
All right. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That was great.
Don's right. I mean, you could sit there for 12, 24 hours, whatever.
Sure.
I'm sure he's got stories, forever.
I can imagine if we got into the details of just, shooting the holiday specials or the Paul Lynde Halloween special, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure those behind the scenes would be incredibly.
You could talk about just the Oscars alone. Like, what were they always talk about the 89 one with Rob Lowe, which I think he's talked about before. It's like, but let's say the quote unquote worst one. What was there one that he thinks is like nailed it? That was the best one, or
right.
I'm like, and he just keeps opening up more doors. It's like, okay, well, he was friends with Dolly Parton. It's like, okay, Bette Midler.
I didn't realize he he wrote like all her stuff for Hocus Pocus and
I
those
didn't
things.
either. Yeah.
I think that's
No.
awesome. To
But I
really
mean, you would use, like, when you mentioned the name, I really didn't correlate it. But once I saw his face,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? So I think that would be the way a lot of people would go. They'd be
Right.
like, who? And then they would see him and go, oh my God, that's the guy from, like you say, Hollywood Squares. Or this
Right.
or that. You grew up seeing him on specials and this and that. So, you know, he was all around back in the 70s and 80s, you know,
Yes.
just for that reason. So,
Well,
that's,
and I always like it when we do talk to someone and they say that, well, no one's ever asked that, or I never thought of it that way, or no one's really brought it up. I'm like, and truly, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's been slammed with, well, the holiday special was a piece of shit. It's like,
right.
It is, but not to us in 77 or 78. It's just like
Right.
going back and you try to watch the A-Team. I'm like, how did we as kids watch this? It's not as exciting as it was when you're a kid watching it. Now to watch it, like, is there a plot? Wait a minute, no one's getting shot at. There's no blood. No one dies.
Right. Or like Dukes of Hazzard or stuff like that. Yeah, you watch those now and it's like, yeah, they're just not as what they were back then to us. But I think because of that, we can enjoy them still.
Yeah, and appreciate it. That it isn't new, it isn't modern, and everyone's a critic now where they weren't before.
Right.
There wasn't the internet for people to talk about it. Everyone's talking in their little circles, so it wasn't like, okay, I don't like that movie, I'm not going to see it. But the ones that did like it, you're talking in your circle, so you kind of, it was a whole different perspective. But like, I like seeing Harvey Korman. I bet B. Arthur.
The scene where he dumps the drink in his head was always one of my favorite parts.
I'm like, but go back and watch all the stuff from that era, and it is that vibe kind of thing, variety show, and
that's all the 70s was. Well, it's like what the reality show is today. That's what the TV landscape was.
Guest stars coming on, Carol Burnett, and the little sketch things. It's like everything was around that. Hollywood Squares, all these things of variety hours. It was bringing in other famous people into other genres and other shows all the time. So it made perfect sense.
Yeah, because back then, they didn't have the outlets they do today, where they jump on like something like we have here, or just on Twitter or whatever, blah blah blah. Basically, the only time you were getting the attention, or they were getting the attention they craved from being seen by people, was to do a lot of those shows, to get their face out there. Yeah,
right.
That was their publicity machine. It would be beyond the Gong Show. Or this or that, know what I mean? That was Carol Burnett, so
the Match Game or anything.
Right, exactly. I mean, especially those game shows where you knew every day you were going to be on TV.
Right.
Looking back, they're campy, but back then it's like, well, I'm the top left corner on Hollywood Squares. Right. Whether people are like it or not, they're going to see me and remember me. And all it takes is one person to see me to put me in another movie or whatever. So, it's
well, and I know we don't have a huge audience, but I'm hoping that, when someone, because now I want to go back and I want to watch things. It's like, okay, I want to watch Ice Pirates and Spaceballs and see if I can find out which sets might have been borrowed, if you can tell.
I thought that's awesome.
It's like just having that appreciation that once you talk to someone and hear the story, now to go back and relook at it and look at it a whole different light. It's like, okay, maybe you thought it sucked, but now when you go back and watch the Star Wars holiday special, you're like, oh, there's a pretty cool guy that wrote it. He's honest about it. Like, look at it and like, okay, all right, it's the time. Like, yep, they were definitely smoking then, and I never looked at it as a bad thing. It was always okay.
You get to hear about how the sausage was made. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where,
exactly.
How they tried to cut corners to save money by using a set that was on a similar project and type of thing. So that's interesting stuff.
But, absolutely.
But
very good.
Yeah. So it's been nice, folks. So thanks again for joining us for traveling through the 80s with the 80s kids. This was another what are we calling it, Kyle? Spotlight episode.
Yeah.
So and then we'll be coming back to you shortly with another one. Kyle has another one lined up, I assume.
We've got some more coming. So
okay. And in the meantime, I think we're gonna try to do a full-on show soon.
Yes.
And I think we narrowed it down to, was it the opening of Epcot?
Yes, I believe that's where we're going.
That's what we were gonna do from 1982. So that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah, should be fun.
So thanks again for joining us. Once again, I'm Rich Oliver, and always with me is Kyle Lentz and Don Brown here on Traveling Through the 80s.
Yeah.
With the 80s kids.
All right.
Thanks for listening.